They are trying to lay the groundwork. The president has done this, and so isn't Bill Barr, that vote by mail is going to be fraudulent. And so really important that the Democrats brought this up in this hearing with Barr. Here is Cedric Richmond and Bill Barr.
In your position as the Attorney General of the United States, is Russia attempting to interfere in the 2020 presidential election?
I think we have to assume that they are.
Thank you, sir. Now, let's talk about the integrity of the election, which is also something Congressman Lewis fought for. Jared Kushner implied that the president could move the election day. Can a sitting U.S. president move an election day?
Actually, I haven't looked into that question under the Constitution.
Well, 2 U.S. Code Section 7 says federal election day is the Tuesday after the first Monday in November. So if you take that as a correct statute, is there any executive action by a president?
I've never been asked the question before. I've never looked into it.
As Attorney General of the United States, do you believe that this 2020 presidential election will be rigged?
I have no reason to think it will be.
President Trump tweeted that the election will be rigged, but he also tweeted that when he was losing to Hillary Clinton, and he tweeted that a day after it was Fox showed that he was losing to Trump. But I don't want to be too political. Do you believe, as the Attorney General of the United States, that mail-in voting will lead to massive voter fraud?
I think there's a high risk that it will.
Do you ever vote by mail-in ballot?
Apparently I did once at least.
But you believe that other people voting by mail could lead to massive fraud?
No, what I've talked about, made very clear, is that I'm not talking about accommodations to people who have to be out of the state or have some particular need not to, inability to go and vote. What I'm talking about is the wholesale conversion of election to mail-in voting.
You do understand that African Americans disproportionately do not survive COVID-19 coronavirus. You are aware of that?
I didn't hear the question.
You are aware that African Americans, black people, disproportionately die from COVID-19 coronavirus, correct?
Yes, I think that's right.
And not that it would be the first time that African Americans would risk their lives to vote in this country to preserve its democracy. But the suggestion is that them having the ability to vote by mail would somehow lead to massive voter fraud. But I won't stick to that.
No, I didn't say that. I just state, I think, what is a reality, which is that if you have wholesale mail-in voting, it substantially increases the risk of fraud.
But it doesn't make it likely.
That's all I said.
Now, I also saw on TV that the president said he's not sure that he'll accept the election results. Can a president just protest because he lost an election?
Protest in what sense?
Well, can he contest an election just because he simply loses?
Well, Gore versus, Bush v. Gore was.
Well, I think that was over a slim voter margin. I'm talking about if it is very clear that the president has lost an election, does he have a remedy to contest the election?
Not that I'm aware of.
All right. The bottom line is there's no evidence. Does he get into the evidence thing there, Brendan, or is that it? There's no evidence of the assertion that vote by mail leads to any more potential for fraud than anything else. There have been 5 states that already had it before the pandemic: Colorado, Hawaii, Oregon, Utah, and Washington. There's no evidence that their vote by mail system was in any way subject to massive fraud. There's no reason to believe that people who vote because they have a reason to vote by mail as opposed to vote by mail are any less susceptible to that fraud either. Let's go. There's one other clip on that regard, and let's just play it because it really needs to be on, people need to be aware of this, because when he is talking about, here's more. This is Mary Gay Scanlon. She's from Pennsylvania. And she asked Bill Barr, this is clip number 5. Mm-hmm.
Because we have a large population of seniors who are at higher risk for the coronavirus. They shouldn't have to choose between risking their lives and exercising their right to vote. But the problem we're facing is that the president has repeatedly sought to cast doubt on the security of mail-in ballots, saying that the 2020 election could be rigged with, quote, millions of mail-in ballots printed by foreign countries, end quote. And you, sir, have repeated this disinformation.
Well, it's not disinformation.
I don't have a question for you yet. Here it comes, though. Last month, you echoed the president's conspiracy theory when you suggested in at least 3 interviews that, quote, foreign countries could manufacture counterfeit ballots, end quote, to influence the presidential election, correct? You did that in at least 3 interviews?
Yes.
Okay. But in fact, you have no evidence that foreign countries can successfully sway our elections with counterfeit ballots, do you?
No, I don't, but I have common sense.
Okay, well, and that's what you responded when you were directly challenged on that. You said, no, you didn't have evidence, but it was obvious. According to state election officials, your alleged concerns here are not obvious, but in fact are outrageous. Every state in the union has absentee ballots. 2/3 of the states allow for vote by mail for any reason. 5 states, Colorado, Oregon, Washington, Hawaii, and Utah, vote entirely by mail and have done so for decades. Even the U.S. military uses mail-in ballots, doesn't it?
Yes.
Okay. So isn't it true that after you suggested without evidence that foreign adversaries could sway our elections using counterfeit ballots, election experts and officials from around the country said that what you suggested was virtually impossible, preposterous, would never happen, and would be readily detected due to the multiple levels of security used with mail-in ballot systems?
There are not multiple levels of security.
Okay, well, so
and I don't agree. I don't agree that it's a.
Okay, reclaiming my time, and again, I'm happy to supply you with the statements that were
before
provided
Donald
from around the
Trump
country.
raised concerns about
In
it. Every
fact,
major publication.
Reclaiming my time, sir. In fact, there is no evidence that foreign countries can make counterfeit ballots and create a real threat to our election security. Are you aware that in May, the president tweeted, and I quote,
pause it for 1 second.
Mail-in voting.
I just want you to contemplate the idea of Russia or China or France creating all these ballots, bringing them to the United States, right? Because they got to be postmarked. You can't mail them from the country, right? So you smuggle in these ballots. You go into, I guess, key counties, right? Because you're going to be sophisticated about this. You send these guys in with I don't know how many ballots they're going to know. How do you guess? I mean, this is something he's saying. It's common sense that they could do this. So let's just work it out common sense wise, because we're not going to listen to the experts. We're not going to listen to the people who run the elections. It's common sense. So you smuggle it in, right, in a duffel bag, the ballots, the fake ballots. And these guys are good, right? Because what these secret agents have done is they've gone in and they probably infiltrated the county election board to get a sense of what the ballots are going to look like, right? I mean, you'd have to do that because, it's not, it's not like there's just a ballot that says, Donald Trump and Joe Biden. There's a whole ballot with local elections. So you gotta fabricate those. You got to bring them into the district, I guess, so that you don't have a foreign postmark. And you mail them from the district. You got to know the names of the voters and hope that those voters are not sending in their ballot too. Otherwise, they're going to get 2 ballots from Brendan and from Matt. You guys have moved, let's say, theoretically to, some
Broward
county,
yeah.
Broward County, maybe want to move up to Michigan. It is of the myriad of ways you could imagine interference in election, this would be the last way that people would do it. I mean, I guess you could say, like, maybe there could be hacks into voting systems, and you prevent people from voting. And this,
I was going to say the machines would be where I would start my investigation.
The idea that you're going to produce, you're going to be able to replicate a certain county's ballot, and then figure out a way to have it mailed locally with names of people that wouldn't show up to vote, is so absurd that this guy should not be hired to be the local dog catcher. Never mind just the concept of that is so outrageous. It's so ludicrous. It's insane if he believes that. I'd be more concerned if he actually believes it than the fact that he's just being lying about it.
Yes.
I mean, it's so absurd. Let's continue to play this. I think Scanlon's doing a decent job here, but how absurd this notion is not even, and the idea that anybody's interviewed him before and he's given any response other than, yeah, no, that's absurd. Of the myriad of ways that one could worry about election security, the idea of a foreign government producing counterfeit ballots and being able to sway an election, highly unlikely.
To our election security. Are you aware that in May, the president tweeted, and I quote, "Mail-in voting will lead to massive fraud and abuse. It will also lead to the end of our great Republican Party," end quote.
I wasn't aware of that tweet.
Well, that tweet suggests, sir, that the president is spreading disinformation about mail-in ballots because he's afraid that if more people vote, he and his party will lose. The fact, Mr. Barr, is that our foreign adversaries cannot actually influence our elections by submitting massive counterfeit ballots, but the FBI and our intelligence services have repeatedly warned that those adversaries are actively trying to sow mistrust of our election systems, and by repeating disinformation about mail-in voting, you and the president are helping them. Just switching gears, you would agree.
Well, I'd like the opportunity to respond.
You would agree that prosecutors who make political contributions are identifying fairly strong.
There you go. Good for her. But there is no response to that. That's exactly what he's doing. I don't know that he's doing it at the behest of a foreign country, but the idea of going out there and saying that mail-in ballots are susceptible to being counterfeited and somehow mailed in by foreign adversaries I think you'd have a tough time doing it unless you were like the election committee of a county. Like, you need all the people on there who are all going to conspire to do this. We're just going to create fake ballots. But then I think you got other problems. They would probably find an easier way of doing it. But that's that.
I mean, Barr, I don't think Barr does believe it. I think he's afraid of enfranchising people.
Well, I think he's afraid of enfranchising people. I think he's afraid of it because he does see it as a potential, and I don't even think this is necessarily accurate, as a potential way of bringing new voters in. I mean, there's really mixed data in terms of if there's any benefit to one party or another with these ballots. But I do think what he's really doing is they are trying to set predicates. They are trying to get premises and predicates into the bloodstream of our media and our common knowledge, right? Common sense that the mail-in ballots are questionable, period. So that in the event that Donald Trump loses, and there are states that have mail-in ballots, they don't have to argue the premise. They just argue the conclusion. And that's what they're trying to do. That's what they were trying to do with all of the Ukraine stuff. They're trying to lay a premise so that Donald Trump has some type of argument. And so that's why this, that line of questioning, at least in terms of the integrity of the election and getting Donald Trump out of the office if he loses, is the most important thing right now on some level.